roll call.
Roll call is taken, thank you.
Okay, let's rise and pledge allegiance, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a relatively short agenda. We would move to approve the agenda unless there are any additions or deletions.
So moved.
Support.
All in favor say aye or yes?
Yes.
Yes, aye.
Aye, yes.
Aye, yes.
Sure. Sure.
All those opposed? Okay, we have an agenda. Now we will move on to the continued review of the annual city budget.
First, we'll take the lead.
Right.
on this one.
So, since it's over, as commissioners, you guys have this packet to follow along with. We are gonna pull up the exact same thing up here on the screen so people at home and in attendance can follow along. My intention is to go through this very, very, very fast for my portion of it and leave time for a bunch of questions if you guys have them. So, we're gonna kinda highlight, we presented, about a month ago, we presented a proposed budget. So we have included, for the general fund, we did include what the proposed budget as of a month ago was, along with what the now current budget is. So I'm really just gonna try to hit the highlights of the things that have changed since the last meeting that we had. And then, like I said, if I'm going too fast, stop me, so I'd rather leave more time for questions and discussion, so. General fund revenue, here are the categories for revenue that comes out of the general fund. I did split out internal service fees this time into their own separate category per the discussion we had last time, so that we can kind of see those a little bit more clearly. Again, these are gonna be a little easier to see in your packets probably than on screen. The biggest changes in the revenue for the general fund between the originally proposed budget and the current proposed budget is that with the Headley rollback, it was more than what I had originally projected for our tax revenue. So our tax revenue saw a little bit of a decrease, I think it was about 60,000 decrease in the projected tax revenue from the general fund. Again, that was just with the Headley rollback numbers coming in a little bit smaller than what we had originally projected. The other big change on the revenue side is with the internal service charges. We changed the four main departments out of the general fund that charge internal service fees are finance, human resources, IT, and engineering. So as we adjusted those budgets, we also, on the expenditure side, we also had to adjust the amount that we were charging out of the general fund to the various departments. So as we reduced the budgets in the general fund, so too did the revenue that gets charged out to the various other funds. So those were really the two major changes. There were a couple of other minor tweaks based on, we had a little bit more information as far as this year data that we could use to project and some state information that came out with some more updated numbers, but really very small changes outside of really those two things. So that's where you can see the difference between what we had originally budgeted for and what the now current revenue projection is for the general fund, which is about 5.3 million. Is the new number. So that is the basis of the revenue on the general fund side. Does anybody have any? I'm gonna stop there if you have any questions. Now we can get into the expenditures. Roger?
The business license and permits, would that not include the marijuana licenses? Or should it? Don't we have a $5,000 at least
Yes, we do.
license for?
Two. This is that would be, that might have fallen under, that might have been classified under fees instead of licenses and permits. I might have to move that. There were a couple of things that were under fees that I think probably should have been up in the business licenses and permits. So I will check on that and verify to make sure we do have it in the budget. I'm pretty sure we do. It just might not be, it might be in that fees category as opposed to the licenses and permits. But I will look into that.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's
No, you are right that it is.
business license and permits or something we should have.
Yep,
If we're getting that money, it should be in here.
yep. And
Yep.
like I said,
There
I'm-
should be two of them, Roger.
Two of them, yeah, I thought there were two. Yeah, the one, yep. Okay, cool. Okay.
Any other questions on the revenue side? Alright, moving on to the general fund expenditures. Split out the general fund expenditures based on how they are split up on the annual financial statements. This is how they classify the various funds. So the first one is community development. Community development consists of economic development, downtown maintenance, parking lots, and planning and zoning. So, economic development is our first one. There is a decrease from the original proposed budget to the current budget. That was because we have taken out the position of the assistant to the city manager. We are not currently budgeting to fill that position for the next fiscal year, and a portion of that time was going into economic development. So you can see salaries and fringes are really the big decrease here. So that's really what was driving that department. Downtown maintenance, slight decrease again in the salaries and fringe benefits. This was partially because of updated numbers on public works charges to the downtown maintenance, and more of an emphasis, as we've kind of talked about a couple of times, of trying to get as much seasonal and lower cost labor into the general fund as we can. Obviously, can't do everything. We're gonna have to have some of our full-time people doing stuff, but to the extent possible, trying to keep the things that are being charged out of the general fund at the lowest cost possible. Parking lots, no real changes there. And then planning and zoning, same thing as with economic development. A portion of the assistant to the city manager time goes into planning and zoning, but with us not filling that position, there is no salaries or fringes charged to that department this year. Those are the main highlights on that section. Next section is community safety, so police, our fire board contribution, public safety, and emergency management. On the police side, you can see a somewhat significant decrease between the original proposed budget and now the current amended budget. There was an administrative staff that has retired, and they're in the police office, or the police department is not gonna fill that position. There's also currently a vacant police officer position that is open, that is going to not be filled with a new full-time person at this time. So that is where the decrease in salaries and fringes come from, were those two positions. It did result in a slight increase in overtime, just for obviously covering some of that position, but a net decrease to the general fund contribution overall. And then there was also about $12,000 worth of operational costs that the police department was able to cut out of their budget this year. So that's where our decrease in police budget, proposed budget, is came from. Fire board, our contribution to the fire board, that was tentatively, well, it was approved by the fire board at Monday's meeting. So everyone is bringing their proposed budgets to their respective townships and cities, all the participating area cities and townships, to get their final approval. But it was approved at the fire board level, so we should be good to go there. No real change, and just a couple of small decreases in public safety building inspections, nothing really too sizable there. And then emergency management, hopefully, knock on wood here, through meeting COVID expenses and other emergency management stuff, so we have nothing budgeted for emergency management this year. And cross our fingers that it stays that way. Property maintenance includes buildings and grounds, and then our cemetery. Buildings and grounds, same theory of trying to keep costs down. We actually were able, the biggest change here, if you'll see the line that says the internal service fees, the public works services has gone down from 149 to 115. Public works was able to cut some expenses, plus as we reallocate it based on where public works is gonna be spending the majority of their time this year, as we decreased the amount of time they're spending in the general fund, increased the amount of time they're spending, especially on the water side with the lead and copper. This allocation is based on usage, so as we use less, the overhead allocation to that fund is less. So partially a savings citywide, and partially just a change in where that is being allocated at resulted in that decrease. And then on the cemetery side, no real, a couple $1,000 just from shifting some, or making some small cuts, but nothing really of notable size on that. Transportation in the general fund, this includes your sidewalks, your non-Act 51 public works, street lighting, and the contribution to the airport. Sidewalks, biggest change here is in the capital outlay. The decision was made that we originally had in there the full project to do the Charles Avenue sidewalk. We have decided that what we're gonna do in order to get a balanced budget this year, we're gonna do half of the project this year and half of it next fiscal year. So we're not eliminating the project, we're just gonna split it over 2 fiscal years in order to ease some of the burden on this fiscal year's budget. So that is the major change in that department. Non-Act 51, the only thing here was, and this actually went up, if you'll notice, in salaries, this was actually a typo on the last one, it should have been 40,000 on the last one, I missed a 0, so just made a change there. This on the original one, so. Street lighting, we talked about this. Eric and the DDA board have discussed this. This is where we had the replacing the streetlights downtown. We decided that the decision was made that we're gonna focus just on the parking lots right now. We're gonna hold off doing the streetlight replacements. Obviously, if one goes out, we're gonna replace it. But as far as just going through and doing the replacement program of the street lighting downtown, we're gonna push that off at least another year so that we can focus on some of the areas in our capital projects that we have a higher emphasis on right now. And as we discussed before, contribution to the airport, we are not proposing any contribution, general fund contribution to the airport for this year. Recreation and culture, so this would be our parks and then our contribution to the public library. Our parks budget really didn't change too much, pretty status quo to what we had before. Contribution to the library, we originally had the original proposed budget of a contribution of $300,000. The new proposed budget is $100,000, and we will get into that more when we get into the actual library's budget. But that is with the increase of the operating millages and then some of the cuts that have been made, that is where the contribution from the general fund is decreased. So. And then executive administration, this is your city commission, city manager, city clerk, IT, elections, human resources, and engineering. On the commission side, we did go up just a little bit. We did add in $3,000 for, we've gotten a quote. We're working on trying to get new microphones and a new sounding board for this room. So that wasn't in the original proposed budget that we showed, but we do have that in this budget. So that was really the major change in that one. City manager, not a lot of changes here. We did move a portion of the city manager's salary, I think 5% or so of his salary and fringes to DDA. Originally, the plan was the assistant to the city manager was gonna have a portion of their time to the DDA, but with us not filling that position, we had to get some time there, and as of now, the logical thing was for a portion of Eric's time to get allocated there, so that was really the big change there, and then a couple small decreases in operation, but that was really the highlight there. City clerk, just a couple of small operational things here to, a couple of things that we're pushing off, we're holding off a year. I think one of them is the codification, is that one of the things that we took out, we're gonna push off one more year, so to try to, again, ease the burden on this year's budget. IT, the original budget that we had was to have a full-time person dedicated to IT. I know that's something that we've been discussing for several years, is something that may be important, but with the budget constraints this year, we have removed that position entirely, so we're not gonna be filling an IT person. The portion of the salary and fringes that is in IT will be a percentage of my salary and fringes to oversee the IT department. Not for any additional compensation, just a portion of my normal salary taken out of finance and put into IT. And then with not having a person, we were able to decrease some of the operational costs, including, we were planning on replacing one of the computers. And we decided we can hold off, we can get one more year without having to replace a computer, so. That's really where a big change in IT, and this really was where a big change in the revenue side for the internal service charges, because IT gets charged out to internal service fees, so this significant decrease in expenses also resulted in a bit of a decrease in, it's not revenue to the city, but revenue to the general fund through internal service fees.
What's the capital outlay?
That would be for a new server. We are due, actually, we're about 2 or 3 years overdue for a new server, and we've been advised by IT rate that we really can't push that off another year, so that is for server upgrade here at City Hall. Elections, no, not really too many big changes there. Couple tweaks, but nothing really. Human resources, same thing, a couple minor tweaks, but nothing of too much significance as far as decreases or changes from the original proposed budget. Engineering, same thing. And that gets us through that section. Stuff caught up here. Fiscal services is finance and assessing. Finance has seen a decrease in salaries and fringes, along with a couple of other things. The biggest change here is that the finance clerk position, we have moved from a full-time position to a part-time position. That position is currently vacated, and we are going to try to hold off a little while before we fill it and kind of see exactly how much we need and where we can piece together through other personnel to figure out how we can keep that cost down as little as possible, but that is really the big change in that department. Not really much on the assessing side, pretty close to the budget, maybe the budget that was before. And then on the debt service side, it's just on there because we did look at the comparison prior, we don't have any outstanding debt on the general fund side. So that was fast, but that was the overview of the changes and where we are currently sitting. I know we realized this as we were reviewing it again today, that this doesn't actually have a totals page, which I didn't realize until we were putting the packets together. But the general fund, this budget is a balanced general fund budget, so our total expenditures exactly matches our total revenue. So we took that $460,000 general fund deficit that we were discussing at the last budget meeting, and we do have it down to a balanced budget with those changes that we discussed today. So there's a lot, I know, there's a lot of changes. I guess before we jump into the other funds, we'll open up if there's questions on the general fund, we can talk about those.
I have a question.
Okay.
So with the seasonal work, obviously, you said you were able to offset some of the costs because you're able to let some of our full-time employees do a little bit more intensive work, especially with water, and then the seasonal work what happens if we don't have those seasonal positions filled?
I believe at this time we do, for this year, we do have those seasonal positions filled.
You do, so there's not a concern that those people will leave?
It's,
Well, they could, but depending on how much time is left, we'd like to replace them with another seasonal if it's an option, if there's not enough time left in the season. And it's theoretically possible, yeah, but we'd have to have full-time person.
And then how would that impact the budget? Would it be, you'd have to offset that cost, correct?
We'd have to explore a couple options, to be honest, but they'd look at either reduction in certain types of maintenance as far as mowing, other types of upkeep thing, but that would be some of the first things we talk about.
Okay.
any other questions on the general fund before we move on?
And then just with the IT, I might want to make sure I heard you correctly. So you basically moved part of your salary into that, but you didn't get an increase or anything?
Correct, no, just a percentage of my salary.
Okay. Moving forward, I don't like that ideology. I think people should be paid for what they're doing. Now, if that's something that was already in your salary and it's something that you've already been paid to do and it kind of just been moved around, that's one thing. But to say that, hey, you're doing this new role, I think you should be now, obviously, this year's moving forward, I don't think that's the plan.
The idea is to
hate
get
that
us
idea.
through,
Get
yes,
through
to get
this
us
year.
through. Obviously, we we do need someone on staff eventually that is dedicated, that we can use as sounding boards with working with IT right for the long-term planning. But Curtis is really just filling that role from not necessarily day to day, but just that conduit between IT right and like the main thing right now is the server. He's getting that server up and running here at the
Yes.
first of the fiscal year. So long term, hopefully we can. I don't want to say how long, but our goal would be to bring someone on that we can pay part time or whatever it is to deal with IT directly. Because obviously, neither Curtis or I or anybody, staff sitting in here right now are experts or even claim to be experts in it. So.
Because I'm sure it's taken some time, right, to set
Yeah.
that stuff. Part of your day is dedicated towards that, or dedicated towards that. I think obviously we need to make sure that that's, whether it's a full-time employee, a part-time employee, or paying him what he deserves to be paid to do it. Institutions have full-time people that do just IT for a reason, and I get it, but I don't think it's Curtis's job to offset the budget in that regard. Obviously, that's his job, but not in that. It's not his job to take personal losses just because we were short. So I think moving forward, we need to make sure that stays. The way we keep department heads and keep people here is by paying them what they're worth.
Right, we can obviously circle back to the general fund if more questions come up, but I will move on to some of our other funds. The other governmental funds that have restricted purposes are our major streets, our local streets, and our street improvement village funds. I'm not gonna get into too many of the details on this. I'm actually just gonna flip right now unless anybody has any specific questions. Some of the accounts, if you're looking at are like differences between current year and prior year, or even the original budget, the new budget. If you look at totals, the totals really didn't change much. We are trying to restructure this so that there are not so many accounts and the information is a little easier to follow going forward. So we have done some account structuring changes, so some of it's not gonna make a ton of sense if you try to compare necessarily line item to line item, and I apologize for that, but we are trying to move forward in a more simplistic, easier to follow, easier to understand methodology. From a total standpoint, the major streets fund is showing $165,000 gain, increase into the fund balance this year. We kind of briefly touched on this the last time we met, but basically for the major streets, we are doing the major project every 6 years now, right? 6 years. So every year we're not doing a major project. We really need to be setting aside a portion of our budget so that we can fund that project every 6 years. So it is not uncommon, and it's a good thing that we are showing an increase in the fund balance this year, because this year is not one of the years that we are doing a major project. We are also proposing to move to do an internal transfer of $300,000 from the major streets fund to the local streets fund. Perfectly legal from an Act 51 standpoint. This will help offset some of the increased costs that we've talked about doing in the local streets, and then it's advised that if you can do this, because you can, once the budget is approved, you can always, or once the funds have been moved, you can always move back from local to major, but you can't move from major to local once a year is closed out. So it makes sense to try to move some of it into local as long as it's needed and as long as it's within the rules, and it is. What we are proposing is all within that. So that is higher this year than what it has been in the past, but we are also doing a lot more work on the local streets, proposing a lot more work on the local streets. So in order to help fund that portion of that is coming out of this. So
I just have one question.
Okay.
All those little red numbers, the things in parentheses, what, is this a different, does that mean it's all deficits there, that's all overages, what?
those are things that the system, I'm trying to find what that says.
I just, it's just always, I just want to make sure I'm reading it correctly, because I don't know that I am. I think
So-
it may mean something completely different than what I think it is, so.
On the total side, it's just a negative, it's just showing that there are more expenditures than revenues for that specific department.
But on
So-
okay, but overall.
But
when you-
overall,
you
it's
put all
still
dump all the
positive.
cookie jars together, it's fine,
Right,
okay.
yeah, exactly.
That's what I needed to know, okay.
And then on the local street side, this one is showing a fund balance, of use of fund balance this year of, a little over, between 100 and 200,000. Again, this is something, 183,000, this is something that we had talked about wanting to do. The local street fund balance has a somewhat healthy fund balance, and we have the people to do it and the work to be done, so we wanted to put an emphasis this year on really trying to get some of these, we added about between $75,000 and $100,000 in additional expenses this year to do some additional patchwork and do some additional, surface maintenance stuff on our local streets, so we are dipping into the fund balance on the local street side, but that is a conscious decision to try to get a little bit of extra work done in the current year and try to up our maintenance, so.
What we have here is 50 to 75, is what we were.
I know we were. And then on our street, millage fund, again, this year, we're gonna see, $303,000 hit to the fund balance. This is because we're showing a significant increase this year because the street project that would have been done this year and funded with this year's revenue, we're doing 2 streets next year, so this year, we're showing a significant increase in the fund balance because we're gonna be using the money that we got this year, we're gonna be using next year, so that's just a timing thing of between when we receive the millages and when we're actually doing the street project. So we do have 2 street projects in the budget for this upcoming fiscal year. So that brings us to our component units. The 2 major component units are the DDA and library. DDA is pretty straightforward, there's not much to it. We got our revenue being brought in based on our millage, and then some administrative and small expenses here. Does show an increase in fund balance of $10,000 as they proposed, based on this proposed budget, so as we've kind of talked about, with DDA, we tend to build up, kind of same thing, kind of build up until we have a major project to do. Obviously, this current fiscal year we're in, we used $100,000 of the fund balance to go towards the parking lot engineering, so now that we've used a sizable amount of that fund balance, it's gonna be back to kind of building that back up, so. And then on the Alma Library, so this is the one that probably we've had the most discussion on so far and the most changes done to it. So on the revenue side, we have increased property tax revenue from upping the operating millage from 0.5 as it was last year to 1 full mill this year that was approved at the last budget meeting, so that we can see in the real property tax, which is the first line, and the personal property tax, which is the third line. Those increases are the increases as a direct result of upping the operating millage, and then with the Headley rollback and with all the numbers that we've got, the updated revenue calculations for those, as well as the IFT and OPRA numbers. So increase in revenue from that, and then an a decrease in the general fund contribution from the 100,000 is where we get the change in revenue from the first proposed budget to the current budget from 748 to 641. And then getting into the expenditures, the major changes in the expenditures were changes in salaries and fringes for decreasing the amount of part-time hours that their part-time workers will be working. And then the other major change was our budget change is the decrease in maintenance cost. Similar to what we said on the general fund, we're really trying to emphasize as much seasonal and low-cost labor doing the maintenance at the library as possible. We also, with decreasing the amount of time at the library, the number of hours at the library, and increasing the number of hours being used at other departments, the total of the overhead charge or the total charge from the Public Works Department went down significantly, so we saw a pretty significant change in the cost to do the library maintenance for the year. And then other operating decreases throughout for less in books, less in DVDs, just small decreases throughout on the operating side in order to get to a cash balance budget, it's still gonna show, that the fund is $147,000 underfunded, but this is the 140 of depreciation plus the 7,500 of interest. The interest is not paid out of out of the library's operating account, that is paid out of the, millage collected from the debt, so that doesn't count from an operating cash standpoint. So while it says negative 147, it technically is underfunded, but from a cash standpoint, it is truly balanced. So it is, from a cash in, cash out operating standpoint, it is a balanced library budget. So obviously, ideally, and going forward, looking at funding, at least partially funding depreciation should be something that we consider, but this year, given everything that's going on and trying to make as minimal of an impact on the operations as possible while still being able to present a balanced budget, we decided that we were not gonna worry about funding depreciation in the current year. So something we'll have to talk about going forward, but not an immediate need area. So that's how we got to a balanced library budget. And last section here is enterprise funds. Again, we kind of fly through these pretty quickly. State Street Plaza shows a negative fund, or a fund balance deficit, not fund balance deficit, budget deficit of 15,000. Again, from a cash standpoint, cash in, cash out, we're still in the good because 25,000 of that is depreciation. So yes, we're not having enough cost to fully cover our depreciation costs, but we do have enough cost to cover our operational costs. So this is something that we have, as staff talked about looking at our lease agreements and looking at making sure that we are going forward covering our costs to the extent possible, and would obviously really like to be able to cover our depreciation. But at least as of now, we are still balanced from a cash in, cash out standpoint.
Are all those units rented?
Everything that's rentable is rented. We have 2 leases that are coming due that we'll be renegotiating, and they've been long-term leases.
So if everything is rented to the standards that you would like, will we meet the 25,000 depreciation value?
It'll be close, yeah. We have two units in the Prospect Building, which is the red one.
Okay.
The far eastern space is really not rentable anymore. The one where TV3 used to be, I believe that one we could probably rent again and get some revenue on it. Long term though, the amount of money that would take to bring that building up to snuff is not really worth it, because the way, being built into the rail bank basically, long term that building probably should go away, so we don't really want to spend a lot of money in that building, and it probably should go away at some point. Our real true value is in the old transportation building where Secretary of State used to be and such. Centria, their lease is coming up here this next month, and MSU Extension, theirs, I think we got 2 more years on that one. That one's a really low lease that was agreed to many years ago. As soon as that one comes up, that one, we could come really close if those 2 could come up.
Especially in today's market, I think it should be standard that you cover that, probably even 4 or 5% more than that, just in case. I don't think that's unreasonable for those types of buildings, because we know there's not a whole lot to rent right now, so.
I agree, we're replacing the boiler in the old transportation building this year, so that's a substantial investment for us.
And that's a hit then, because we're not funding it, so we should fund the depreciation as well as have a little bit of a nest egg for things like that happen.
And that was planned out though.
Okay.
We planned that.
Did you say the eastern part of that building is not occupiable anymore? Where's the railroad?
They're in the old court.
Oh, I thought-
where the court was at.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I thought
They're right in the
that's what you
center.
said.
They're right in the center, yeah.
Okay.
They don't require a lot of amenities. It's
No,
really
I
the
thought
guys
they were
that-
on the end.
Yeah.
They were in the middle.
Yep.
Have we ever thought about selling all of that to be done being a landlord?
Well,
We've talked about-
long-term, the property is worth more to us as a city
It
than
is, okay.
the buildings themselves. So if we can break even with the buildings and keep that property
So it
within our
becomes-
hands, it's in our best interest, not necessarily for us, but in 10 years, 20 years of the if that rail line comes
The
through.
railroad, that will be an ideal spot
Yeah.
for the station, the railroad.
We spent a lot of money and time and effort the community has to get the rest of that riverfront put together and purchased and cleaned up. It'd be a kind of a shame to sell it too prematurely.
Yeah.
Since you already own it.
It'd be nice if someone could come in and fix it up though and do something with the spaces that are, you know, either not being able to be occupied or need some love.
Yeah, we could probably, for the time being, rent the old TD3.
Yeah.
But it would be something like a long-term lease because the plumbing is probably gonna be
Oh,
the
sure.
issue, and
Yeah.
it's all in the concrete in the floor.
Nice,
So,
yeah.
Good thinking.
Yeah.
An outhouse or?
Yeah, exactly.
We call that a special facility.
Right.
Short-term remedies.
We're getting creative.
Alright, next budget is the transportation systems budget. This is a balanced budget from both the revenue and expenditure standpoint. We talked about the last one, this year it was incredibly high, but that's because there was of that 5 million, or 5.5 million, 3.5 million of that is a grant. So compared to last year, it's obviously gonna look significantly both on the revenue and the expenditure side, it's gonna look significantly high, but that's because that's just the one large grant that, the city was awarded, so.
There's that.
Other than that, pretty much standard, like I said, same things we talked about the last one, we do have in here the budgeted, as we talked about, the, salaries for the drivers are budgeted in the budget currently for increasing them from the grade 1 to the grade 2. Doesn't mean that it has to be done, but if that decision is made down the road in the year, we'd rather have it, know that we have it in the budget comfortably, and then have to figure it out and look at it then. So, again, not something that we're asking right now for a decision, but it's there in case that is a decision that's the commission wants to make at a later time. Alright, so. Wastewater, from an operations standpoint, wastewater is showing about $540,000, or $564,000 to the good. This is not including capital projects, this is including depreciation, so we are covering our operational cost and our depreciation through our current rates and our current processes. Now, capital is obviously the big question here because we've got millions of dollars of capital projects that we want to do. So we are, from a fund standpoint, we are sitting healthy on an operational side. Capital side, we've got money to do some capital projects, not nearly as much as I think that we'd like to do if we had more, and we are exploring grant opportunities and loan opportunities to be able to do some of the more expensive capital projects that we want to do on the wastewater side, but at least we know we are sitting comfortable from an operations standpoint.
Is that the chlorine switch?
That is
over?
one of the
That's
projects.
inclusive in there, there's other projects, but like Curtis mentioned, in our future for probably both enterprise funds, it's gonna be loans is what we're gonna be looking for the next, really 8 months, try to get ourselves in line for the next round of SRF funding for the interest loans, to try to get some of these capitals accomplished. Because the grant money as of right now doesn't exist, and what does exist to a limited extent, but it is ultra competitive, very difficult to get. So some of these we can't keep holding off, waiting for those grants to happen. We're gonna have to start getting aligned within that loan process. Some of those loans take about 2 years to get even on.
But I know when we talked about the goal setting, that was
Yes.
a major goal for this year. if I remember
That is
correctly.
in this year's.
That is funded, there is money for that. We're just hoping to be able to offset it with the grant that we asked for.
Okay,
last
sure.
commission.
So you
Trying to
wonder.
lessen some of that direct blow to
Sure.
the funding. So
Okay.
yes,
Yeah, I
you're
just was concerned about the safety issue.
No, we are definitely doing the project. That
Okay.
project is greenlighted, so. The water fund, not quite as rosy of a picture.
That's so good.
We are showing a projected deficit in the water fund in the current year of about $650,000. This is even with the rate increases that we've proposed and we've talked about. Again, not all of this, 220,000 of this is funding depreciation, so it's a little bit, it's not all cash in, cash out, but we are definitely not currently at a rate where we are being able to cover our operational cost with our rates. So that is something that we, obviously with the increases that we've proposed, that we're looking at trying to do. And then on top of that, trying to figure out how we're gonna fund some of our capital projects. This budget does include the lead and copper study stuff because that's not technically considered a capital project for financial purposes. So that is in the budget, but no other capital projects, no water mains, no anything, no water tower repairs or painting or whatever, none of that is included in this deficit, so, over the next 6 months to a year, this is obviously gonna be probably one of the biggest tasks that my department and David's department working together on is to figure out, just how we are gonna be able to get our rates to a spot that we can start covering, or that we can cover our operations and how we're gonna be able to plan on doing the capital projects that are necessary going forward, so. We do have plans to do an internal rate study in June, that's already kind of in the works of getting set up so that we can see how the good news is, we're not the only ones in the situation, the bad news is, we're not the only ones in the situation, so, this is, everybody I talk to is talking about how this, with the lead and copper stuff and just water infrastructure in general, being able to keep up with the cost of this department has been a challenge across the state, and the state has not made it easier with all the lead and copper requirements that have came down, so we are doing our best to keep our costs as low as possible and try to keep going forward, but we are gonna have to, over the next couple of years, really have some serious, deep discussions about how we're gonna go forward with being able to keep this water fund. It does have a fund balance right now that we are able to eat into a little bit, but that's more of a one-time Band-Aid as opposed to an actual fix. So we're gonna be okay this year, with the increase. We're not gonna eat too far into where we're getting into the 6 months operating, but we realistically, without making a significant change, starting probably as early as next year, best case 2 years from now, we're gonna get to a point where we need to do something, where we're not gonna be able to afford to provide the water and do the capital projects that are gonna be required, so. Not the most fun conversation, it's not a end of the world conversation, we're okay this year, but it's definitely something that's gonna be talked about repeatedly even after this budget cycle is over.
Curtis, you probably already discussed this, but I wasn't at the last budget meeting, but the $194,000 in maintenance supplies in the equipment rental, is that all related to the copper?
It's about 90% of that's related to lead and copper,
Okay,
so,
I would safely say majority of it.
yeah, I was gonna say it's.
okay.
I don't know how percent, but I would say majority
Yeah,
of it safely. Especially if it's an increase, because we have normal appurtenances that we have as far as breaks, that type of thing that
Yeah.
naturally happens, or we have the increase, but yes, if there's a significant increase, that's what's related to.
Okay.
I thought I had heard, and it must have been incorrect, that we were not covering the cost of our water right now with our service charges.
We would not have, we are this year, we would not have this upcoming budget year without an increase.
Okay, because what I see here is water sales of 1,000,005 and purchased water of 910.
Yep.
Okay, but I realize that only leaves 600,000 for all of the other stuff, but we are covering the cost of water.
We are,
Period.
with the proposed budget increase, yes, we are covering our cost of water.
Okay. Okay.
For this fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
This fiscal year.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And then the last one we have here is the rubbish collection fund, and this is where our trash and our leaf collection and yard waste program all come out of this fund, and this is a balanced budget as well, so a net zero revenue and expenditures on this fund. So that's where we're at. Happy to answer any more questions that you have. I guess the other thing we have in this presentation is the fee schedule, so we are working on putting this together, so it's probably definitely not perfect right now. This is something that is a requirement to have from the budget award, to have basically, you're supposed to have a fee schedule included in your budget. We have one of those things where we have the fees, but we've never really had a master schedule that we could present every year and say, this is our list of all of our fees and all of our changes. So this is one of the projects that Madison's been working on, putting together and working with all the department heads to try to get all of our fees all in one spot, so that every year as part of our budget cycle, we can present this and present the proposed changes to you guys. So we're still working with department head. We haven't gotten everybody's feedback back yet, so hopefully we'll have that by next week's, and we'll continue to make adjustments as we see fit. If we find things that aren't included, I know there's a couple of things that we're hoping to add that we haven't added yet. So we'll continuously have some changes to this, but as a first draft through it, I think it's been a pretty good list, and I really appreciate Madison putting it together for us. The only changes, and they're the changes that we've already discussed on a couple of occasions, are the changes to the water rates, the sewer rates, and the yard waste and trash for this year. So those are the ones that are marked with an X on '68 or something on that. So those are the rates that we use to create the budget. Those are the proposed new rates that we have, that we are proposed for this year. So.
Probably the biggest one that we'll be adding is a FOIA charge. That's taken up a lot more time of multiple people, staff. So we are going to be instituting that to hopefully offset some of our staff time on it. It's taken up a lot of time.
Could have made a killing on it this past year.
We
If you
sure
were
could
charging.
have. If people could pay for it, yes, yeah. Yeah. So that is coming in.
With the
I know
yard,
I know this isn't easy, and it's probably the worst thing you guys have to do each year, but this is, on my 4 years, this is the best experience as far as going through this, with the explanations and the way it looks and the way it's balanced, and so kudos to everybody for the work.
This isn't the budget per se, but what's in place for the commission, for example, to know, like, either quarterly or bi-monthly, where are we on a year-to-date basis?
The
I think we were
dashboard.
so surprised about
Yeah.
where we were, and every time I think about the budget stuff, I know it's numbers. The budget is simply a financial plan. It should reflect your values. It also, once the balloon goes up, it's a plan, and nothing ever goes as planned. So as you look at that, probably either monthly or bi-monthly or quarterly, there should probably be a way for someone to say, whoa, there's something going on. I mean, being off by 10%, $500,000 on a $5 million budget, and finding out with very little time left is, yes. And so I don't know how that happened. I don't know whether we missed it in terms of our assumptions didn't come through, unusual expenditures. I mean, again, you can't plan, it's a plan, but it would really be useful in future to say, once every, 5 or 6, whatever it is, the commission says we have this update on where we are, because, and a year to date, right? Because it's not spent evenly. Davis area may spend, 80% of its budget in the summer, because that's when it can do the work. But to know year to date where we're standing would be
I feel like a
incredibly
quarterly
useful.
update
Yeah,
would be.
yeah, whatever you guys decide, but
'Cause
I'm
if
just
the
saying,
finance committee's reviewing, are they reviewing monthly?
should be. We
Are
don't,
you
but
on
we
that
should be,
committee?
yeah.
Okay. So maybe if they're doing it monthly, maybe quarterly to the whole
Commission to know.
Yeah, that would certainly be better than the last month of the year.
Well, and again,
Yeah.
for whatever reasons, and I'm not throwing, from a management standpoint, how we help you, how you can, it's kind of like if you fly from New York to LA, there's countless little mid-course adjustments to make sure you get where you're going. If you're off by 2 degrees when you start and you never adjust, you end up in San Diego. So you want to make sure we can see it. Would be the most useful if I could recommend that. And also, I'd look at policies that we have, which is like fees and other things, or the policies that we're getting on our own way, or other things we're doing financially that would help, that would seem invisible to other folks, would really make a difference. So.
And I know you guys are already doing this, but just because this is my kind of field of study here, are you guys looking all the time for any kind of grant, or you're
All the
already,
time,
all
yeah.
the time, okay?
Unfortunately, we're too small to be big, we're too big to be small, we're too poor to be rich, we're too rich to be poor, and we're too not in trouble with the
Welcome
law
to
to
Alma,
be.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of in that, just that
Yeah.
sweet zone of where we,
Okay.
but yes, we're applying to stuff every
Okay.
time we can, we just
Okay.
don't seem to be very successful at it.
Okay,
So, but, and it's not because we're great, right, it's just because
Right.
of the qualifications.
right.
We're in that
I understand
awkward
that,
stage,
trust me.
so.
Yep. Okay.
One of the things you had mentioned earlier was using the seasonal work. Are there other areas that you see moving forward, maybe in a year or 2 years, that maybe it's a technology that we can transition to with maybe yard waste, as now Granger's going through and using these machines? Is that something similar we could do with maybe yard waste, or maybe it's something completely different? But is there some sort of technology we could look planning in the future to cut some of our costs, whether that's, again, continuing to use seasonal work, to maybe add a seasonal worker to the full-time worker on the yard waste? Because I gotta imagine, Dave, that's probably one of the, I see the body language of some of those guys when they pull up and there's trees just lining the road. I mean, I can only imagine, so.
We have size limitations on our waste, other than we just one. If you're looking at mechanized equipment, my number's about 3 years old, so bear with me. Like turning the piles of things, we have seasonals doing that. If you hire a machine to do that, it's significantly more expensive than having seasonals turn the
Okay.
piles. But one of the ideas is that we've done, if you, commissioners, every 2 years, we rent a grinder to take everything, grind it up to turn it into the compost. We've done that every couple years, as opposed to buying it. We have found that that's advantageous to rent it, and we call all hands on duty for that 1 week that we have it, to reduce that rental rate. As the technology increases, certain things like that will help, but it's definitely been a saving help to stick with the yard waste schedule. I know you as commissioners here, well, we didn't get our stuff out, or they delivered and missed us. We don't deliberately miss people, but the times when we say, can we just do an extended week? One of the numbers the staff put together is if we extended it just another week for those people to wait till the last day to put it out. That's about $8,500 extra to do it for that week, just to do an extended week. There's sometimes where we've talked about considering going into December. The numbers as of last year, we talked about that, were about $8,500 a week, just to keep extending that for the people that will procrastinate until the last minute to put that stuff out. So sticking with those schedules, sticking with dimensions that are listed in the yard waste site helps to reduce those costs. If you have neighbors that have a bigger pile and they yell at you and say, well, yeah, but it's only another 3 feet of yard waste, that's extra time, that's worth staff time to do those types of things. That's why some of those dimensions of people complain or mentioning, that's why those are there.
And really, it's kind of across the spectrum, what type of things. I just know that area a little better than the rest, so obviously, is there anything?
Yeah, there are definitely things that we've talked about internally. Unfortunately, what we usually run into is that any long-term savings has a high upfront cost. And not saying that that's not worth it. I mean, there are things that there definitely could be, but when we're struggling to balance a budget as is, it's kind of hard to eat that upfront cost at times. I know one of the things that we've talked about, again, as a kind of an across-the-board thing, and this isn't a technology thing, but from a personnel standpoint, it is just that is there areas where we can have, that we currently have full-time employees that not necessarily get rid of them now, but as they retire out, could they be filled with a part-time position? The difference between a full-time employee and a part-time employee from a cost standpoint is huge. It's just a reality of it. Again, we're not advocating doing it right now, but as we look towards how are we going to shape this organization going forward, that's an area that there's not a lot of places where I think that would make sense, but there are a couple, and obviously the finance department just made one of those decisions of where we think that we can get away with. I mean, you're never going to get the exact same quality out of part-time that you are full-time. That's just the reality. But the cost benefit, if it's there, it's savings. So it's hard to find part-time help. It's hard to find any help, but especially part-time help right now. But 2 or 3 years from now, if the economy is in a different spot, and especially from a job standpoint, that's something that we can take advantage of. It's definitely an area where you can save some money. Technology, again, we've talked about a couple of things on the IT side, or really just in general. A lot of that stuff is, well, you can save money, you can see a return in 5 years, but that upfront cost, and we
I'd be interested in if we have redundant programs in IT, for example, if we're spending so much, and one department has a software program and another department has one that's similar, and we have that redundancy there. I don't know if we do an energy audit, if like consumer would come in, because you have a number of facilities, right? And if you can shave with it, and I don't know if they even charge for businesses to do an energy audit, but if they do, and sometimes you can end up a few $1,000s, but if you arc that over 5 or 10 years, or just it offsets the increases that we're going to see, that helps you, I think, too. So there's lots of scratching you can do.
We did just go through all the buildings, I know here.
I don't know if you did it or
We-
not.
We
I
went
didn't-
through and did we changed out all the lights to more energy efficient, cost saving lights at the building. So we are, and I think that was partially cranked, right?
It's the state of Michigan, or excuse me, I'm sorry, the state of Michigan, Consumers Energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With that, so,
They offset costing, it's nice because you get it right up front, you don't have to submit for anyone, you just get the discount right up front. So that's a simple one.
right.
Yes.
So yeah, we're, like I said, when those opportunities come up, we're definitely taking advantage of them, we're constantly looking at them and discussing them, so we're gonna continue to do so.
Now, do you guys calculate, so you go from, like we mentioned that, going from the seasonal work, okay, seasonal for some reason is not filled, so now you have to transition. Do you know what that cost, obviously you know what that cost is, but you know what, are we tracking the difference in that cost? So therefore, if in the future, maybe a machine can do it, because you're not able to get the seasonal work that you're anticipating getting, you can say, hey, this is how much we had to spend extra on full-time work versus seasonal work, which we anticipated. That's 2 years of seasonal, or of those differences, or whatever that may be. Are we tracking that set number?
We do track the difference between part-time and full-time seasonal laborers, so we would be able to tell the difference between if we were short a year, kind of be able to see, we have that
It'd be
ability.
more of a retroactive,
Right.
just calculation.
Yeah, more of a Monday morning quarterback than an actual
Than a-
in-game strategy,
Okay.
but yeah, we do have that data, and we do look at that stuff, so.
Okay.
As far as, that's kind of how we plan how many seasonals, we kind of determine how much work is there and how much can we get out of it. That's how we kind of determine every year how many seasonals to hire, so.
I mean, I think it's good that you're able to fill the positions. I think that's
That's
probably pretty rare in
huge.
today's age, but I'm just looking forward, it's a concern.
Just keeping them throughout the year, the whole summer, and that's a struggle everybody has. You notice it costs, number two, you also notice it in just things not getting done, whether who's talking about take full-time, whether it's something else. It's like taking your cup of water and transferring it through the cup. One cup gains, the other loses. There's usually so many hands to do the work, so. Two different facets you look at, one's financial, the other is going to be what suffers at, what doesn't get done on the other. That's people do these things.
Thank you. Do we need to receive anything or just do?
Just review. Just review.
Goodness, where's the comments already? I'm surprised. Danny?
Thank you, Curtis, for, obviously about all the hard work, and obviously I know it's not just you, it's your whole department doing a great job, and so thank you for the clarity as someone that's only been here for a year and a half, all right? I think Greg's not here tonight, but I think you can heard him over the past saying that, he's had these issues year in and year out. I don't see that, and obviously I haven't seen that, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work you put in. Sorry for bugging you so much tonight, Dave, but that's kind of, like I said, that's my area. Just like Audra's really good at the grant and the finance type questions, I think that's what makes this commission so great, is you have ability, people pull from different backgrounds, and I know the maintenance side of things, so thank you, so.
Roger.
Thank you to everybody, people who presented this and put it together, and thank you to all of the department heads who, over the past month, have really, really, really worked hard, and I'm sorry I missed the meeting last week. But I couldn't help that, I really couldn't. But, I would have said at that time, thank you so much for all of the hard work that every person in this city has put in. The only thought I had, Roxanne made a really good point at the meeting last Tuesday. about the easiest way out of this and the best way out of this is to figure out more ways to get more money in. And one of the things that we talked about or passed over sometime in the last few months, and I wondered if there had been any further thought or action taken on it, was the inquiry into leasing the refinery for solar. Has anything,
Well, the MPR, the folks who own the property are very interested in doing that.
okay,
Obviously, the big energy producers in the state of Michigan, that's their new push, is solar. If we do head down that path, we would need to create an ordinance for solar. But they are very interested in that, and the producers of that energy are interested, so.
Okay. Granted, there would be less tax base on that than if we were to put a $25 billion plant in there, you know, that would be nice, but a dollar is better than nothing if we're a lower tax rate for that kind of thing, but taxes is taxes, as they say.
I don't know much about solar. Where can we educate ourselves on that? Like, what, do you have any recommendations? I mean, is there any towns that have something similar, or
Ithaca
what?
has a large solar
Ithaca does?
area just south of
Okay.
the bowling alley and stuff there, right out
Okay.
back, and they're one of their industrial parks. I think
much about it
consumers, I
either.
think
Yeah.
consumers owns that.
I guess I wouldn't know the positives, the negatives. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
It sounds great, but.
Well, it's
And
like,
it would not be adversely affected by the possible contamination of, you know, ground or
Right,
anything
that's-
else in there. They really don't care that much what the ground is like. They have a large area. There is no trees that are blocking that. The grid is there
Yeah,
from where all the power was going to the refinery. All of that superstructure is still there to take power out just as easily, so.
Michigan State built that whole big one.
They did.
On,
Parking lots too. They have-
yeah.
in Ithaca?
No, Michigan State.
Oh,
Yeah,
Michigan
Lansing.
State, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Yep, within the last 10.
For some reason, when you
years or
said
so.
Michigan State, I was thinking state of Michigan.
Yeah, no, Michigan State.
Oh, is it
Just
Michigan
like
State that
Sarah,
owns that?
yes.
Okay.
Well, you must
I
be-
block out the Spartans, so.
I do not, so.
I hadn't even
Yeah.
been aware of that there. We were parked, the kids go bowling there, the special ed kids go bowling there once a month, and I had the bus parked in front of Pins, and
Mhm.
what is that over there? And they said, oh, that's a solar park. It's been there now for a couple of years.
Yeah,
and-
yeah.
Check it out.
Yeah, they put them on top of all the parking.
Other parking
Yeah.
spaces. so
Okay.
Smart.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, that may be one of the ways that we can bring some more
like
money
I said,
in.
they're,
Yeah,
the
if
company's
they're-
interested. and,
Good,
yeah,
good,
So
okay.
it would be, if they got to that point, as a,
Mhm.
community and commission, we'd have to
Yeah.
create that new ordinance to do it.
I think that could be done. Probably. Okay. Thank you, that's all.
Nothing to add. Thanks for the explanation and the hard work, folks. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate all of you. I can't think of really anything. We have our child advocacy annual banquet next Wednesday. We have not had it since 2019, so I feel a little out of it. I'm not really ready for it, but it's next Wednesday. We'll be honoring an advocate of the year and an organization that advocates for children. So it should be a nice event. Love to have any of you attend if you can make it. It's at YFC Wednesday at noon. Lunch catered by Litwillers, so it'll be delicious. So, that's all.
I forgot to mention, if you intend to see Sister Act, which you should, get your tickets. I'm sure it will be sold out. We had 4 performances this past weekend. None were sold out, but all had maybe 20 to 25 seats available in the entire place for it. So second week usually does sell out. Tickets are available online.
Nice.
Yep, also I'd like to thank my staff, everyone. This was not easy. We've had, I know for sure all of us have had sleepless nights over this, and I have, and I do appreciate everyone. Curtis, I appreciate my discussions and working through this with you and all my other department heads. It's been a very big learning experience, and thank you, and getting to where we're at right now. Obviously, we have next week yet to adopt the budget, but thank you to everyone. Fun things, obviously, festival is next week. Can't believe it's already here, it's next week, so, yeah, it's insane. So hopefully everyone's in town, to at least come out and enjoy some part of that. And then the week after, we have the Back to the Bricks tour on June the 3rd, Friday, from 2 to 6 in town too. So it's back-to-back stuff. So hopefully everyone can come and enjoy that. That's it.
Yeah, thank you to everyone. It seemed an insurmountable task when we started this to get to a balanced budget, so. Yeah, we've got a lot to do going forward, but I appreciate everyone's effort so far. Public comment, if there's anyone who would like 5 minutes, step to the podium and state your name and address, and you can speak.
Peter.
All right, yes, I'm Peter Tasha again. I'm the president of the Alma Library Board. I didn't sleep very well last night either. But, 6 weeks ago, I called Audra Stahl, and I asked her, I said, I want to talk to you about the library. And you know what? Audra said, Pete Tasha, I'd be glad to talk to you about the library, but you need to take a tour of my facility first. I said, okay.
Just to tell people that.
And I said, you know what I did say? I said, I would love to. So, you know, I went and I spent, it was at least 20 minutes, probably longer, looking around her building, and it's pretty amazing. They have, you know, child suicide prevention, they have, you know, family nutrition, they have child psychologists, they have a big meeting room for education, they have maternity clothing, they have these rooms where children who have been abused sexually, physically, or they've witnessed abuse or terrible things, like maybe a murder that they've witnessed, and now the children have to talk to police or a lawyer or a counselor or a psychologist. And, you know, she showed me all that. And I guess the point is, we went back to her office and she goes, you know, Pete Tasha, you know why I had to do this? And there's kind of an inside story, but I'll be glad to share it to anyone. I give permission to Audra to share it too. But, you know, the bottom line is, one thing Audra didn't say during that whole thing is, Pete, I really apologize for all the money that we're spending on these kids. I really apologize for all the services that we provide. I really apologize for the expertise that we have. And really, for the last 3 months, I feel like I've been bullied, and I know the library staff has, and that how come you guys aren't more like the rest of Gratiot County? Why do you want to be like this when everybody else is like this? Which I don't even know if that's really true, but I mean, even in the last meeting, Greg said, will you guys spend $47 per person in Alma, and everybody else does it, or St. Louis does it for $27. And I'm like, well, yes, because the residents of Alma in 2004 decided to build a $4 million building. It's probably would cost $8 million to build today. And they also passed a millage to support the library in perpetuity. And I mean, come on, these are good things. But okay, so this morning I spent 2 hours talking to the library director in St. Louis, and I said, all right, how does Alma become more like St. Louis? You know, I mean, that's what we've been asked to do, I guess. And, you know, just a couple things, I looked at today's budget, I studied it over pretty carefully. And, you know, one thing that, if you look at the operating budget of the library, 10% of it is going to inner city services for accounting. I mean, $52,000. I mean, that's okay. Accounting is you try to divide up the expenses the best way you can, and that's fine. I asked St. Louis, well, how much do you pay in the library towards accounting expenses? Zero. I mean, so to say that the city's not supporting the St. Louis Library, of course they are. They're providing those services for free. We're charging the library $52,000 to do that. And so effectively, I mean, I guess we're getting $100,000 from the general fund now, but 52 is going right back to City Hall. I'm not saying that's wrong, I'm just saying that's how St. Louis is supporting their library outside of how we're doing it. You know, sorry. As far as maintenance, and I think I think we're being charged a fair amount, to be perfectly honest. We're being charged $75,000 for repairs and maintenance for the library. St. Louis is being charged 15 for the entire year. Snow plowing, mowing, everything. And obviously that's a really good deal. Obviously the city of St. Louis is supporting the library, because I think the cost of supporting the St. Louis library is more than $15,000, but that's what they're being charged. And I'm not saying we're being charged wrongly at 75. Truthfully, I think that's a very legitimate number. I just want you to know that those two things alone, when you're talking about $47 per person versus $27, I mean, that's like $11 of that just by itself. And then she looked over our budget and said, all right, the electric bill, the natural gas, the water sewer, the insurance costs, I mean, they don't even pay insurance costs for the library in St. Louis. The city's picking that up somehow. The bottom line is, we have a big library. It's 2,800 square foot, 28,000 square foot versus 5,000 square foot. It's 5 times bigger. It's gonna cost more to run the library. So I am not embarrassed by the quality of our library. I know what's in this budget. We're a library board. The library is going to survive. You're cutting the discretionary money, the money that we actually can do things with, that you might imagine is what the library spends on books and magazines and circulation system, online services, all those kinds of things. Last year we spent $125,000 on those. This year the budget's going to be decreased to $78,000. That's about a 30% reduction. I mean, that's $50,000. It's only $50,000. I mean, it's huge. It's a 30% reduction in everything we do for people. But yes, we can survive. It's not sustainable. I mean, you cut our budget by 30%. You cut our budget that amount every year. It definitely isn't sustainable. And the thing is, that's an $8 million building out there. We should be leveraging that. And I mean, listen, I have a building downtown. I want nice parking lots. I mean, spending $100,000 on engineering, okay, I know, I don't even know where we're gonna build the parking lots, but I know we have a building over here, and I know we're gonna provide a ton of services. I know Lori is gonna speak to the amount of services that we provide. Curtis is good. I can understand Curtis's numbers. I really can. But I feel bullied every time I talk to certain people about the library, because 100,000, you might get that this year, but you're not getting it next year. And I'm like, I mean, we need 50,000, 75,000 right now, and you're gonna have an outcry from the public saying, come on, support the library. That's all I have to say.
Pete, can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
One of the things, not directly related to that, but one of the things that came up in comparison was them being a district library and us not being a district library or whatever. Are we or are we not, and what's the difference?
We're not a district library. Two things. In 2007, I mean, I was on the library board. I was a brand new member. It was strongly discussed even when we built the building. The city commission at the time said, there is no way we're giving up. We're not giving up our property to a entity that we have no control over. 2014, county passed a millage. Excellent choice. It's really helped all the libraries in Gratiot County. The city commission at that time said, there is no way we're giving up control of our library to a district library. And a district library is something that could be formed, of course. It's not like you just flip I mean, it's
Right.
difficult. But what I tried to tell the mayor the last time I spoke up here, I said, listen, I really respect the library director in St. Louis. She's very, very smart. She is not dumb enough, nor is Bobby Marr dumb enough to join an organization that's not going to support the library. I mean, why would you want to join forces with Alma when the mayor says we're going to cut all general revenue funding to the library by next year? I mean, if I was the Ithaca library director, I would run away from that all the way. I mean, I don't think it's gonna happen. But, I mean, Curtis and Eric went to the county library board and talked to them. They can give you an impression of what they thought, what the chances of that happening in a relatively soon period of time. And I don't know if they're giving an honest answer right now, but I don't think they're gonna say, yeah, that's gonna happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a question, or is that not allowed?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, not of you, of Eric. How do we come up with like the figure on like the 75,000 for maintenance? Like what is that based, is that based on like?
It's hours of our
We just-
staff, that's why they were talking about bringing seasonals in to do some maintenance that they could do. Now,
Okay.
some of the more technical trade type stuff, I will need a full-time person going in there, so it's their charge per their wage, their benefit, and it, you know, whatever they may use, the materials or whatever.
Is it based on, are you looking at like how much maintenance they required the year before,
Based
and
on
then you're?
historical data as well.
Historic-
We make
okay.
projections based on that, but yes, typically we look back, it's about a 3-year average the most, and we've gotten down to that with spreadsheets of how many hours. Because like that budget, we'll start putting that together in November, looking at particular man hours for personnel hours, for seasonals, for full-times, look at where they spend it on, and then you start allocating for the next over December, January, where you project you're gonna use it for the next year.
Okay, I was just curious. I mean, I'm not an expert on maintenance by any means, but I do a 14,000 square foot building with a parking lot and snow removal and lawn and tree trimming and all that stuff too. And what we're spending a year is a third of that. So I was just curious how that's figured with, snow plowing, lawn, all that. I just wasn't sure how you guys came to that number. If it was, so it's basically, you're basing it on manpower more than anything.
It's manpower, and like you talk about snow removal, you have equipment charge for the truck being there, those sorts of things. They're
I mean,
that type
It's
of-
probably about 1/3 snow plowing and mowing, 1/3 building maintenance, and 1/3 cleaning. Because they do have
Yeah.
cleaners that come in.
Yeah, I have a cleaning staff
So
too.
that,
yeah.
that's probably about the breakdown is.
Yeah,
And I can't speak of that, I don't know the delineation of those. The furnace unit that was installed this last year, I don't know if that was inclusive this last year in that number, to be honest with you. That was, correct me, the words are 20 to 30,000.
What was that?
The furnace
Furnace.
boiler unit that was installed there, that was.
Yeah, but
about 20 to 30,000.
before that, there was probably $10,000+ coming out to fix it over and over. So, I mean, it was closer to $50,000 by the time it was all said and done.
I have a quick question, Dave. Just without getting too sidetracked. I know we talked about last meeting about our cost per yard in terms of, I know what do we sub out the noxious weed, like 0.02 or 0.018 or something like that for yards to cut the grass. What does our hourly rate cost per yard to cut a facility like that? I think that would be interesting to know, because if we can just have that other company do it for cheaper than what our
well,
cost
that's what,
is.
I mean, I hate to suggest that, but at the same time, I'm thinking if I'm paying a lot less for snow plowing with a local company, and I'm paying a lot less for yard. I mean, I don't know what the city charges, but
mean, because you can shift the maintenance cost for that machinery.
It's
You
probably,
can do
it's
the-
probably more, I mean,
Yeah,
that's why
yeah.
the discussion with going to seasonals for what things you can do.
But I mean, if you're spending
yeah.
$25,000 on your lawn each year,
What you really are talking about, though, in general, and I know, Pete, what you're saying, and I understand what folks are saying, is this. Every organization like this that has its own services usually will charge internally for those services as they build their budget. The problem with it is sometimes in an organization, people will say, this is the only way I can make my budget, I'm going to charge these
right?
pieces. So you're going to need to, as an organization, decide on how we want to do interdepartmental charges, because really what an interdepartmental charge is taking money from one pocket and putting it in another. And you have to measure what's it cost to run his department. You have to look at what's the market value for that, like Danny's asking. But that's a broader, with all due, and I mean it, with the library and other offices, a broader discussion in terms of how we're managing our cash flow and everything else. It's a legitimate discussion. It affects the library, it affects virtually every other office. And it needs to be internally, what's our policy about internal charges for services? Because it really can get out of whack, and it also, the good news is it can make it more effective in terms of planning your budget. The bad news is it can really get out of whack, and someone can be using that as a way to offset whatever their costs are. The third reason for that is it's kind of regulatory, right? If I have facilities management coming out every week to move the chairs around, there ought to be a charge because I want to discourage that. They have other things to do. So you use that as a policy tool for behavior. So I think, all I'm saying is, it's a broader discussion, and it needs to probably, the commission probably, and with the help of the administration and folks that are affected, really need to have that discussion. So, I don't mean to shut it down, but I think it's really a
well,
broader piece.
I
yeah.
agree. I mean, I think you're completely on the right track. I think a lot of times we like to throw out the word fair. Well, that's not fair to other departments. That's not fair to other, programs. That's not fair.
Yeah.
And so when we're looking at the library, for example, I think that those are discussions that need to be had moving forward, so we can really look at
Yeah.
what are these charges, how are we splitting up those salaries, how are we splitting up those, I know I've had some discussions with other departments as well, they're paying a fee, I'll say a maintenance fee, just because that's the easiest one to say, but they're doing their own maintenance, they're changing the light bulbs themselves, they're doing, they've called on something, they're doing something, and so then it's like, well, why am I paying a maintenance fee when I'm taking care of them, so I think some of that is looking at, I'm just using maintenance because that's one that we're talking about, but, so maybe we do need to look at some of those systems that we have in place,
And that gets back to the policy thing in terms of our budgets. When we start looking at, are we getting in our own way with our policies? And again, that's a broader, library is a focal point, but it's a
and I
broader
get, like,
discussion.
with the accounting services, we do the same thing at my agency, we have 5 main programs, and we take that accounting service and we split it 5 ways, so one program may say, I didn't get $20,000 worth of accounting, but it's like, well, we have a fee, we have to pay for this service as an agency, and that's how it's getting split. So some of those things, that's,
Yeah.
like it or not, that's just the way some of that has to go
That's
to
what- yeah.
have the service, but then other things,
So it's
there's,
worth the discussion.
yeah, there's other things you can kind of,
Just a real little bitty question, but not a big bunch of money. How much lawn does the library have? Not a lot.
well, be back, down by the,
Not a lot, not on the library property, that park, whatever the,
Of course, yeah, you've got
Oh,
part
that's-
of it's the park, and then you've got the parking lot maintenance, you got the.
Because I know the pavilion is city property.
Yeah,
It's
the
not
other
the
half of
library.
what you see, like, what do you think is that
Roxanne's
square with that?
popping off.
That's a park.
yeah, right, yeah. Okay, I mean, that's not all library lawn mowing, I hope. Yeah, okay. It shouldn't be.
It should be in the general, it's
Right.
still general
It's a
fund.
park.
Yeah, right,
It's
but
in the
it's
park,
not,
it's park mowing.
Park, yeah.
Yes.
And Pete, I agree with you completely on stuff, but I don't think you're making a really fair comparison when you say St. Louis is donating the services and stuff, because they're paying $15,000 as opposed to our $185,000 or whatever. Somebody's paying that money, okay? And even though the city of St. Louis is not charging the library, or charging them a very small amount. Somebody's paying for that. That's coming out of somebody else's budget or the general fund or whatever. They ain't doing it for free. People aren't coming over donating their time to do that. We're just charging everything as we see fit to each individual department here, pays a part of it. So I don't think it's really accurate to say we are paying way more for services here, which shows that the city of Alma is not supporting the library. I don't think.
I apologize. You're missing my point. I guess what.
I don't think I
I'm
missed
sorry,
your point.
Greg,
I didn't miss
what
your
I,
point.
what, I'm sorry. I can't
That's
answer the question.
Yeah, sure.
No, my point was not that, my point was we are spending more money on our library services than St. Louis. That's true. But St. Louis is spending money on their libraries in different ways. So when you say it's 47-27, the city of St. Louis is, just exactly to your point, supporting their library above and beyond just the millages. They are supporting it by giving the services to the library. I did not mean, I meant the opposite of what you're trying to say. Yes, Alma supports the library. They're giving a net they're giving a net of $48,000 from the general fund after you subtract out the accounting of 52, which is a legitimate expense. It's got to go somewhere. I'm not saying it shouldn't go to the library. It's a very legitimate expense, but St. Louis is absorbing that expense and then giving it to the library so they're actually spending more on their library too.
What you're saying
We
is it's
are
not
not
accounted for.
spending.
Yeah.
St. Louis supports our library, we support our library. Those numbers get closer together as you study the numbers. The only reason we really spend more money on our library than the residents of St. Louis is because we have a bigger library and it costs a lot of money to run that
Okay.
library. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, all right, and yeah, that I agree with
Not that-
completely.
not
When you say
that-
St. Louis is absorbing the money, no, they're not absorbing.
St. Louis is
You're
definitely.
absorbing the money if you decide to cut First Presbyterian Church's lawn, just, okay?
Exactly.
But when you have your lawnmower guy come over and cut First Presbyterian Church's lawn, you ain't supporting it. I mean, well, he's not supporting it, okay? Because somebody's paying for that. You're paying for it.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
St. Louis loves their libraries too.
Mhm.
Yes, they do. They love their library. It costs them less because it's smaller, but they love their library.
Oh, I'm sure
and
they
they're
do.
supporting it
Okay.
in a little bit different way.
Okay.
That's what I'm about to say.
All right, agreed. Thank you.
I think sometimes too, it's just the way we verbalize.
Mhm.
Like, I mean,
Yeah.
some of us verbally say we support the library. We verbally support transportation. I think sometimes it's the culture we've created or the attitudes when it does sound like we're going to cut this is done, we're not going to take care of this. We have to kind of change our way that we're handling things as a commission.
Agreed.
We do. I mean, I know people are tired. I know people get burned out. I know it's frustrating, but we have to be a more supportive unit moving forward. Even if that means making tough decisions, we can still do it with support and, moving things along in a positive direction. I mean, I value transportation. You all know that. I have said that. I don't always feel that everyone values transportation, and that's frustrating. I value the library. I don't always feel that people sitting up here value the library. And I know they probably do. It's just not the way it's being expressed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think it's just we just need better attitudes. I need an attitude adjustment all the time, but we do. We need to have more positive attitudes. We can get through this. We
Is
can.
there any public comment?
Speak.
I was publicly commenting as a citizen of Alma.
I'm Lori Taylor, the director at the library. I'm going to read this because I'm nervous and I'll skip something. So, I have worked at the Alma Library for almost 33 years, and I have watched our library make amazing transformations over the years, changes that have been progressive and kept our library relevant and popular in a rapidly changing technology-based society. I have also seen many years of city budgets struggle to get balanced over these years. Sometimes there have to be cuts to our city departments to make this happen, and the library has always participated in these cuts. And we are proud to be a part of our city team and more than ready to roll up our sleeves and help balance the budget. However, I have never seen the library budget facing such massive cuts as those proposed for the year 23, for the fiscal year 23. I fear that if the full amount of these cuts is approved, the health of our library will suffer greatly. And this is happening at a time when our community is reaching out and depending on its library more than it ever has before due to the increased needs created from the pandemic and the incredibly high inflation rate that we're experiencing. For example, since January 1st, we have had over 23,000 people walk through our doors. We have checked out over 15,000 items that include books and movies and audios, magazines, Wi-Fi hotspots. We've made thousands of copies. We've sent hundreds of scans and faxes for people. We've hosted over 80 library programs with over 1,800 attendees. And additionally, since August, we've had 581 meeting room bookings, consisting of birthday parties, bridal showers, baby showers, business meetings, depositions, nonprofit groups, support groups, book clubs. This represents just a small number of the groups and organizations that rely on our meeting room availability. And other than the meeting rooms, these statistics reflect only the first 4 months of this year. But the numbers like this can only tell part of the story. I can tell you how many people attended our story times, for example, but I can't tell you exactly what that means for those families, many of whom may not have access to any other early literacy programs. For every patron that relies on our computers or Wi-Fi to prepare and send resumes, or uses our collection to delve deeper into a new subject, or simply wants a quiet place to study, the library changes their lives. It enriches it in ways that are impossible to quantify. And a library is a long-term investment in the life of a community, and our community needs this support. Alma, with its population of about 10,000 people, is the largest city in Gratiot County, but it's also one of the poorest. Our local poverty rate is 25.5%, nearly double that of the rest of the state and 1.5 times greater than our surrounding areas. 62% of our population has a household income of $50,000 or less. And these are some depressing statistics, I know, but this is where the library steps in. We fill the gap. We serve as a meeting place, a community center, a refuge, a repository of knowledge, but mostly we're all of these things to anybody who visits the library, regardless of their economic situation. Public libraries operate on the principle that providing these things to more people only strengthens a community, never diminishes it. The city of Alma accepted responsibility, or took responsibility for the library in 1922. 100 years of partnership between the city and the library. And we have enjoyed a healthy relationship most of these 100 years. It was about 20 years ago that the city's local contribution to the library dropped significantly when the city millage passed, from over $400,000 a year to about $250,000 a year. After the county millage was passed, that number dropped again to $175,000. For nearly 10 years, the city has made a $175,000 local contribution to the library. We did not receive an increase in this revenue in spite of the increased costs of operations and the steady rise of inflation. For fiscal year '23, the proposed local contribution to the library has been reduced to $100,000. And the proposed cuts to the library expenses total approximately $130,000. To me, that's not a little bit. That's massive for our budget. If the full amount of these proposed cuts is approved, the impact to the library will result in a 47% reduction in part-time staffing hours, 50% reduction in new book purchases, a 75% reduction in new movies and audios, 33% reduction in programming funds, 50% reduction in building maintenance services, a 30% reduction in services such as Melcat, Hoopla, Overdrive, digital services like that. In addition, the loss we will experience from our part-time hours being reduced will have to be filled by our full-time staff. Staff who are highly educated in their professional roles here at the library will be checking books in and out and shelving books, keeping them from more specialized duties such as programming, collection development, cataloging, and database management. You can see why I am concerned that cuts of this magnitude will negatively impact the quality of our library as we know it. And it's true, the Alma Library is unique in our area. We have more staff, more space, and more patronage than other libraries in the county. We provide more for our patrons than other local libraries. This is partially because Alma is the largest city in the county and we have the biggest library. But it's also because time and again, local taxpayers have voted to expand our facilities and services. No one voted for an empty building. The local community wanted the services and programs that are now possible because of our expansion. Cutting these vital services will make the original investment less valuable to the town. The Alma Public Library is an incredible success story for this town. Citizens voted to expand and improve our services, and that's exactly what happened. The popularity of the library is a testament to just how much our community appreciates and relies on what we do. Why then is that success being met with such harsh funding cuts? Why is a beloved community institution being asked to do less for the people who live here? Instead of finding more and more ways to cut, reduce, and diminish the library, we should be trying to build upon our existing accomplishments so the library can continue to stay vital and versatile and a well-loved resource for years to come. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. It's really great. Lori, will you start sharing some of those numbers like on a regular basis with us? Like with that, because those are, I mean, that's amazing to hear it. I mean, I know how great the library is. Before we had our building, we had every meeting that we had practically, you know, that was one of the spaces we used. But to hear those numbers that's awesome. It's really
My family has been involved in that since the inception of the new board, or the new building. In fact, it was my son who made the videotape, which I have a copy of VHS on when I would like to have it made into a CD or something so that we could watch it. He made the videotape supporting the new library that was.
Yeah, we won like first place for that.
Yes,
library
right,
initiative.
yeah, it was my son Buddy that made that,
Yep.
So we have been, that was the one where Jean Kimball put her leg up on the stacks trying to wedge a book out of it, which was amazing. But none of us are looking to tear the library down. You guys have to know that. we don't feel that way. We got stuck with a very bad situation where we found a great big hole in the money that had to be accommodated. And we have asked everybody, that's what we were thanking these guys for here, everybody has, stepped up and said, well, we can cut this, we can cut that, we can cut this, we can cut that, to whittle that down to something that's manageable, because we have to do that. We can't absorb that loss that we didn't even realize was there until a couple of months ago. We're not asking or even proposing that this be a full-time kind of a budget situation for the library. We have to get through this mess right now. If we find some other sources of funding, if we do some other things that could bring some more money into this community, certainly, we don't want to cut the library. We don't want to cut your programs any more than we want to cut the staff that we're having to cut here, or the services that we're having to cut here. So, agreeing with you guys completely.
Well, one of the things that I think the point being made was that whereas we're adding seasonal part-time in other departments to not have people that are more highly educated doing services to save money, we're cutting the library's part-time people, and then we'll be having the people with their master's degrees
Doing-
shoving the books, and, so I think that's the point. And I'm not even sure here where I went awry with public comment. This has become a whole new venue, and I will take full responsibility for this.
It's appreciated.
Yeah. Well,
So, I think it's not normally a give and take dialogue, it's supposed to be
It's just
comment, and we
staff.
keep our mouths quiet. I understand, but I just want to make known that we are not following Robert's rules of order. Comment.
no,
And I
Sarah's
apologize.
shaking her head, and I'm
Yes.
guilty of that
Yes, so,
as well. But,
so I appreciate what you have to say, Roger, but,
okay.
is there anyone else from the public that would like 5 minutes to speak, to address the commission?
Question. You need me to go to the.
Yes, please.
Sure.
So my name is Ann Swan, and I'm on the board of the library, and I guess I was under the assumption that there was still one more meeting
There
for
is.
decision to be made.
Mhm.
But all of tonight's presentation sounded definitive. And even after disclosing some really, I wish those numbers would have been available maybe earlier in this process, but even after that, it kind of seems like the response is, we should know about that moving forward or whatever. And, this isn't forever, which sounds like the decision's already been made. But the only reason I wanted to come to the podium is to, if there's still some time between now and when we vote, I hope, even though tons of work, and I appreciate Curtis too, because he has worked with us a lot, and I know a lot of work has gone into it, but if there is time still to gather some information about what you may not see, the tangible service that the library provides to a lot of people that you might not see because you may not have to use that resource or that venue to have your party or your gathering or to get some extra education or but if you could spend a little bit of time maybe between now and before you make the decision so that in good conscience you've looked at what it offers the community and what might be lost this year, because especially the pandemic, I think the library was just testimony. It was a rock star when kids weren't going to school and they didn't have Wi-Fi, and some of them weren't doing homework at home because they didn't have Wi-Fi to even connect. The library still just spent so much time to be innovative, to keep things going, to continue to be a resource. So those are things that are hard to sometimes measure in dollars, but because the community is not flush, it's not an affluent community across the board, I think they serve a lot of people that just kind of goes under the radar. So please consider that before you vote.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Mark Williams, Public Safety Director here in Elma. With everything that was said, I just wanted to be clear, I don't like to talk for other people much, but we've lost a lot too. And they don't, in all fairness to the commission and the mayor, I don't think that he doesn't support the library since there's no money. So when the city manager comes to me and I talk with Curtis, the thought is we have to make cuts too. And I don't feel bullied by that at all. I just feel it necessary. We lost 2 full-time positions, $150,000 worth of patrol cars in the last 3 years, and cut 12 grand. So should I get up here and give you all what's gonna happen now because of that? Our response times are under 2 minutes. If we cut people like we are, it would be 4 to 5 minutes. That's double. I don't wanna be up here against the library. I love the library, and it shouldn't be department against department. If what you said is give you facts, I can give you facts too. There's just no money to fight for. And we're all feeling it, so I just want to get up here and state that. And Lori's one of my favorite employees that I work with, and she does a wonderful job at the library, and they do have a wonderful library, but we have a wonderful department too. And if our response times are double when someone's having a heart attack or being assaulted, it makes a big difference for our citizens here too, so. I think David's department's taking a hit, so I don't know what to do. I just know that it's necessary. If the money's not there, it's not there. And so I don't, and I understand where Pete's coming from if he feels bullied by that. I don't necessarily feel bullied by that. I just feel that it's something that we have to deal with as a team. And I want to keep the team cohesive. I don't want a division, but I couldn't sit there and not get up. You know, when you say, bring us facts, well, where's it gonna come from, my department again? Do you see what I mean? I gotta defend my department too, and the service that they provide to this community, so that's all I have.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mark.
I'm Dave Ringel, Public Services Director. You guys heard me talk for 45 minutes too long last week, so I'm gonna keep it short. Sorry about that. Mark inspired me to give something for a speech. None of these cuts are easy, and Lori's and staff have taken it very, very well, in my opinion. Many of us have been here for the last 10 plus years. In the last 3 to 4 years, it's been invisible, but some of us saw this coming. And nobody's to blame, and I want to make sure that that's the case. Whenever there's a problem, and Mark mentioned it with the team cohesion, that is the truest sense of the word. When some of these problems are known about, talk about sleep, we've gotten none since October because we knew some of these were coming. And unfortunately, we always look to blame, and we try to find blame. And then, well, it's got to be this department or this is one. So I want to make sure, because it's always easy to point the fingers. I mean, Curtis and I have had discussions about this. We had frank discussions about this. It's very easy to point, well, that's the reason why, and I'm not getting what I get for that service. I literally could bore you for another hour and explain that. But to talk about what Nick explained, there is a cost to doing some of these services. There's a cost to that level. Certain things with lawn mowing never will compete with 1 cent a yard. Can't touch it. Can't touch Johnny with a lawnmower for $7 an hour and his little Cub Cadet. But you get a lot more than that. You get leaf collection as a part of that. You get parks maintenance. You get the parks open and closed. You get the restrooms cleaned. We had interviews today talking about different methods we're doing with the restrooms to try to lower costs. A lot of things that we are looking at. But I want to be clear. There is no magic wand. There's no clear answer of blame, and then you just move forward. My departments, we talk about doing a lot of things shorthanded. As much as I know there are tall weeds in areas that need to be sprayed, it's a matter of staff. You hear me quickly explain. If you take water from one glass, take it to another, it just means things are getting done. That's what many departments have done for the last 10 plus 15 years through attrition. You just don't replace who's left. It goes unnoticed. Most of those departments are hidden. But the biggest thing I want to make sure I'm clear on is that we stop pointing blame and stop looking at easy places to cut, because it's super simple to point and it's super simple to judge what somebody else is doing based on a 300,000 foot, 500,000 foot elevation. Keep in mind, I've got a street millage. We talk about how bad the streets are. I can't even get ballot language on the ballot when we talk about that. So there are a lot of problems. There's things that can do. There's things that need to be done, but I just want to make sure that we're not pointing fingers and blaming and things like that. So I want to be clear as far as staff, we have tried our best to work together. Eric's explained it. got a lot of work to do for the next year and a couple of years, so. Many of the older commissioners remember this, there's no magic, there's no bad bunnies left in the hats. These are painful, these are tough. They're tough, so thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Seeing no one, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Support.
All those in favor? Say yes.
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 Meeting adjourned. Thank you.